The morning sun rose over New Eden's capital city, casting golden light across the tall crystal buildings. Governor Robert Thompson stood on his balcony, drinking coffee and watching the streets below fill with people heading to work. 4 million colonists called this beautiful planet home, and Robert felt proud every time he looked at what humanity had built here in just 50 years. "Another peaceful day," said Emily Clark, his deputy governor, joining him outside. "Every day here feels like a dream," Robert replied. "Sometimes I forget how lucky we are." But Emily noticed the worried look on his face. "You're thinking about those reports again, aren't you?" Robert nodded slowly. "The Kreth Dominion keeps expanding closer to us. They're only 3 star systems away now. I've asked Earth for more defense weapons, but they keep saying we're safe. They say our reputation as peaceful traders protects us." What they didn't know was that high above their planet, 75 alien warships had just appeared in space. War Commander Thex of the Kreth looked at the blue-green planet on his screen and smiled a cruel smile. His reptilian face showed satisfaction as he studied the peaceful world below. "Another weak colony ready for destruction," he announced to his crew. "These humans spread themselves thin across the stars. They build farms and cities and talk about peace." He showed his sharp teeth. "But they don't prepare for war." His officer Vrak checked the scanners. "Commander, they have almost no defenses. Just 6 small satellites with weak weapons. No military ships anywhere near here. This will be easy." "Good," Thex replied. "The Galactic Council will complain and do nothing, just like always. Begin the attack. Kill everything." On the surface, alarms suddenly screamed across every communication device. Robert's handheld communicator erupted with emergency warnings. "Unknown fleet in orbit. Shields failing. This is not a drill." The transmission cut off as the first plasma beam struck the city's shield generator. The protective barrier that kept New Eden safe flickered and died instantly. Robert grabbed Emily's arm. "Run. Get to the emergency shelter." But there was no time. The sky turned red as plasma fire rained down from space. Buildings exploded into flames. Parks turned to ash in seconds. The beautiful crystal towers shattered like glass. In the school district, teacher Margaret Wells was reading to her students when the windows exploded. She tried to shield the children with her body, but the heat wave that followed left nothing behind. At the spaceport, pilot James Carter ran toward his ship, hoping to escape and warn Earth. He reached his cockpit just as a direct hit vaporized the entire facility in a blinding flash of light. The bombardment continued for 6 horrible hours. When it finally stopped, New Eden was gone. The green agricultural world had become a burned wasteland of melted glass and black ash. 4 million people had been alive that morning. By evening, not a single soul remained. War Commander Thex studied the dead planet with pleasure. "Excellent work. Mark this system as conquered. We move to the next target soon." He turned to his crew. "The humans are weak. They will cry and complain to the Council, but they will do nothing. Peaceful species always do nothing." As the Kreth fleet left, they didn't notice the small automated probe hiding in the asteroid belt. It had recorded everything. And it was already sending the data to Earth through faster-than-light communication. On Earth, in the Unified Government Assembly Hall in Geneva, an emergency meeting began at 3 in the morning. Every government leader had been awakened and summoned with a code phrase that hadn't been used in over a century. Secretary General William Harrison stood at the podium, his face showing deep sadness. Behind him, a massive holographic screen showed the blackened remains of New Eden. 4 hours ago, we lost all contact with New Eden Colony, he began quietly. 2 hours ago, we received this recording. The screen showed the Kreth fleet emerging from space and beginning their attack. The government delegates watched in horror as the massacre played out. Some cried. Others sat frozen in shock. Admiral Henry Blake, the Supreme Commander of Earth's military forces, stood up. He was a tall man with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen too much war in humanity's violent past. "Members of the Assembly," he said in a cold voice, "the attackers were the Kreth Dominion. This is the 7th colony they have massacred in 50 years. The Galactic Council has ignored all previous victims. They will ignore us too." "What do you suggest we do, Admiral?" asked Delegate Susan Matthews. Admiral Blake looked around the room, meeting everyone's eyes. "I suggest we stop asking for permission to defend ourselves. The Kreth have 75,000 warships," said Delegate Thomas Chen. "Earth's Colonial Defense Force only has 8,000 ships. We cannot win that war." Admiral Blake's expression didn't change. "The Colonial Defense Force has 8,000 ships," he agreed. But that's not our only fleet. Confused whispers spread through the assembly. Secretary General Harrison raised his hand for silence. For the past 150 years, Harrison explained, we have maintained two military programs. The Colonial Defense Force, which everyone knows about, and Project Guardian, which has remained absolutely secret. The holographic display changed, showing massive construction facilities hidden throughout the solar system. Hollowed asteroids filled with shipyards. Underground factories on Mars. Huge stations in the outer solar system disguised as natural objects. While we smiled and traded and built colonies, Admiral Blake said, we remembered the lessons from our own history. We remembered our world wars. We remembered nuclear weapons. We remembered what happens when peaceful people aren't prepared to defend themselves. He pressed a button, and the display showed something that made every delegate gasp out loud. Thousands and thousands of warships, floating dormant in the darkness of space. Project Guardian has built and maintained a fleet of 500,000 warships, Blake announced. 300,000 fast corvettes. 150,000 frigates. 40,000 heavy cruisers. 9,500 battleships. And 500 massive dreadnoughts. The chamber exploded with shocked voices. Delegates shouted questions, some approving, others demanding to know why this had been kept secret even from them. The secrecy was necessary. Harrison's voice cut through the noise. If the Galactic Council knew we had this much military power, they would have united against us out of fear. We would have become the enemy. But now? Now we don't care what they think, Admiral Blake finished coldly. 4 million of our people are dead. Men, women, children. Babies. The Kreth murdered them like they were insects. They will pay for every single life. Delegate Michael Ross stood up. Admiral, even with 500,000 ships, you're talking about total war. The galaxy will never trust us again. We will be feared, maybe hated. Better feared than dead, Blake replied. Better hated than extinct. They voted. When the count finished, the decision was overwhelming. Humanity was going to war. Not just a small conflict. Total war. Complete destruction of the Kreth military and justice for New Eden's dead. Admiral Blake allowed himself a grim smile. In 72 hours, the Kreth will learn what happens when you awaken a sleeping monster. Across the solar system, 500,000 warships began powering up their engines. Crews who had trained in secret for years were finally being activated for real combat. The largest military fleet in galactic history was preparing to move. On thousands of ships, the same conversation was happening. Captains looked at images of New Eden's burning cities. Engineers checked weapons that had never been fired in anger. Marines loaded equipment for planetary operations. Pilots reviewed battle simulations they had practiced 1,000 times. Captain Thomas Reed stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought, watching as hundreds of other ships around him came to life with running lights. All ships reporting ready, sir, said his executive officer, Commander Alice Bennett. Thomas nodded slowly, thinking about the children who died on New Eden. The families destroyed. The dreams turned to ash. Then let's go remind the galaxy why you don't attack humanity, he said quietly. The fleet began moving toward the jump point that would take them to Kreth space. 500,000 warships, hungry for justice. The Kreth had lit a match, thinking they would burn a small candle. They had no idea they had just set fire to an ocean of fuel. Admiral Henry Blake stood in the command center deep beneath Geneva, watching as 500,000 ships appeared on the massive holographic display. Each tiny dot of light represented a warship that had been hidden for decades, now coming alive for the first time. All staging areas reporting full activation, Admiral, reported Colonel Peter Harris, his second-in-command. We have 499,999 ships confirmed operational. Blake raised an eyebrow. We're missing one? The frigate Hope's Dawn developed a reactor problem during startup, sir. She'll need a week for repairs. Blake nodded. Make sure her crew knows they haven't been forgotten. They'll catch up to us when they're ready. He turned to face the display, studying the enormous fleet. What's our status with the Galactic Council? Ambassador Cooper delivered our message 2 hours ago, sir. According to his report, they're panicking. Blake allowed himself a small smile. Good. Let them panic. How long until we're ready to move? 6 hours for final system checks, then we can begin the jump to Kreth space. Travel time will be 32 days at maximum faster than light speed. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out on every ship. On the dreadnought Retribution, Captain Thomas Reed walked through the hangar bay, inspecting the fighter craft and assault shuttles. His crew had trained for years, but this would be their first real combat. "Captain," called out Lieutenant David Jackson, his tactical officer. "We're receiving Admiral Blake's fleet-wide address in 5 minutes." Thomas nodded and made his way back to the bridge. Around him, the ship hummed with energy. Every system was active, every weapon charged and ready. The Retribution was 2 kilometers long, carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and was just one ship among 500,000. On the bridge, his crew stood at their stations, faces tense but determined. They had all seen the footage from New Eden. They all knew what they were going to do. Admiral Blake's face appeared on every screen throughout the entire fleet. "People of the Unified Earth Fleet," he began, his voice hard as steel. 72 hours ago, we lost 4 million innocent lives. The Kreth Dominion murdered them without warning, without mercy, without reason. They believed humanity would grieve and do nothing. They believed we are weak. He paused, letting his words sink in. They were wrong. We are not weak. We are not helpless. And we are not the same species we were 200 years ago when we still fought each other. We have learned. We have grown. We have prepared for this exact moment. The display behind him showed the full Guardian fleet, 500,000 warships stretching across the darkness of space. This fleet represents the largest military force ever assembled in recorded galactic history. We built it in secret because we hoped we would never need it. We prayed the galaxy would remain peaceful. But the Kreth have shown us that hope is not enough. Peace must be protected by strength. His voice grew colder. In 6 hours, we depart for Kreth space. Our mission is simple: destroy their military completely, bring their war criminals to justice, and ensure that no other species ever suffers what New Eden suffered. Blake leaned forward, his eyes seeming to look directly at every person watching. "Make no mistake, this is war. Some of us will not come home. But those who do will return knowing they stood up for the innocent. They stood up for justice. They stood up for humanity. Do your duty. Honor the fallen. And show the galaxy what humanity truly is when we stop pretending to be harmless." The transmission ended. Throughout the fleet, crews stood at attention, ready to carry out their orders. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Council station in neutral space, chaos had erupted. The council chamber was filled with shouting ambassadors from 47 different species. "The humans have violated every agreement," roared Ambassador Grax of the Vorton clans, his massive reptilian body trembling with anger. "No species is allowed a military force exceeding 200,000 vessels. This is an act of war against the council itself." Ambassador Richard Cooper of Earth stood calmly in the center of the storm. "The treaty limits forces known to the council. We never announced this fleet, but we also never signed your treaty. We broke no laws." "Semantics," spat Ambassador Quillith. "You humans play at being peaceful traders while building the largest war fleet in history. You are a threat to everyone." "Are we?" Richard asked coldly. "Tell me, how many colonies has humanity attacked without provocation? How many species have we exterminated? How many times have we refused peaceful contact?" The chamber fell silent. "The answer is 0, Richard continued. "In 200 years, humanity has never started a war. But the Kreth Dominion has destroyed 7 colonies in 50 years. 7 different species, including ours. And what has this council done? You issue complaints. You write reports. You debate while innocents burn." He pulled out a data crystal and threw it onto the council floor. "That contains the full recording of the New Eden massacre. I invite you all to watch it. Look into the eyes of our children as they die. Then tell me about moving carefully." Nobody moved to pick up the crystal. "We are invoking our right of retribution under Galactic Charter Article 7, Richard stated formally. "We are informing the council as a courtesy, not asking permission. In 30 days, our fleet will reach Kreth space. We will destroy their military and bring their leaders to justice. Any species that interferes will be considered an enemy." "This is madness," shouted Ambassador Thelox. "You will destabilize the entire sector. Other species will build their own massive fleets. You will start an arms race." Richard smiled without humor. "The arms race already exists. We've just been the only ones taking it seriously. Every species here maintains a military. The difference is that ours is actually large enough to protect our people." "You cannot win," Grax said, his tone now calculating rather than angry. "The Kreth have 75,000 experienced warships. You are shopkeepers playing at war." "We're not playing," Richard replied quietly. We're the descendants of a species that fought 2 world wars, survived nuclear weapons, and nearly destroyed our own planet before we learned to work together. We know war, counselor. We've just been pretending we didn't. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. When this is over, humanity will demand a full seat on this council. And I strongly suggest you grant it. Because the next time innocents are slaughtered while you debate, it won't just be our fleet asking questions. Back in Kreth space, War Master Chakran listened to the intelligence reports with amusement rather than concern. 500,000 ships, he asked, laughing. The humans are sending their entire fleet? Excellent. I thought they would beg the council for protection. Instead, they show spirit. War Master, said Fleet Commander Drax carefully, 500,000 ships is unprecedented. Perhaps we should consider negotiation. Negotiation. Chakran's voice cracked like a whip. With merchants and farmers who have never won a real war? They may have numbers, but we have 300 years of combat experience. Their crews are untested. They will panic at the first sight of battle. But Drax couldn't shake his unease. He had studied humans. They formed emotional bonds with individuals in ways the Kreth did not. This made them seem weak, but it also meant that when someone killed their children, they didn't react rationally. They reacted with total fury. Mobilize our full military, Chakran ordered. All 75,000 ships. We will crush them at the border and show the galaxy what happens to species that challenge the Kreth dominion. In space, the human fleet began its long journey toward Kreth territory. 500,000 warships moving as one, engines blazing in the darkness. They had 32 days to prepare for the largest space battle in galactic history. The sleeping giant was fully awake now. And it was very, very angry. 32 days had passed. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Kreth border space, and the sight was terrifying to behold. 500,000 warships materialized in perfect formation, their running lights creating a sea of stars where none had existed moments before. On the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, Captain Thomas Reed studied the tactical display. 3 Kreth border stations sat 15 million kilometers ahead, surrounded by roughly 20,000 defending warships. They know we're here, reported Lieutenant David Jackson. Kreth sensors just went active across the entire sector. Good, Thomas replied calmly. Open a channel on all frequencies. The communication officer nodded. Channel open, sir. Thomas spoke clearly and slowly. Attention Kreth forces. This is Captain Thomas Reed of the Unified Earth Fleet. You are responsible for the massacre of 4 million innocent people on New Eden Colony. Surrender immediately and prepare to face trial for war crimes. This is your only warning. Silence stretched for several long seconds. Then the Kreth response came through, filled with mocking laughter. Foolish humans. You send your pathetic fleet to die. We will scatter your ships across space and feast on your bones. Thomas sighed. I tried. All ships, weapons free. Execute Attack Plan Alpha. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The human fleet didn't charge forward like inexperienced warriors. Instead, they moved with practiced precision, dividing into attack groups that surrounded the Kreth positions from 6 different angles simultaneously. The Kreth commander at Border Station 3 realized his mistake too late. He was facing not untested merchants, but a military force that had spent 150 years training for exactly this scenario. Human corvettes struck first, moving at incredible speeds and firing kinetic rounds that punched through Kreth shields like paper. Then came the frigates, their energy weapons cutting through enemy hulls with surgical precision. The Kreth tried to return fire, but human point defense systems shot down their missiles before they could reach their targets. Their shields are too strong, a Kreth officer screamed. Our weapons can't penetrate. The battle lasted only 4 hours. When it ended, 15,000 Kreth ships lay destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost exactly 212 vessels. At Kreth High Command, War Master Chakran stared at the battle reports in disbelief. This is impossible. How did we lose so many ships so quickly? Fleet Commander Drax pointed to the tactical analysis on the display. Their technology is far superior to ours, War Master. Their shields can absorb 3 times the damage of ours. Their weapons have twice our range. And their tactics. He paused, his voice grim. They fight like a species that has studied warfare for centuries. Then we fight harder. Chakran roared. Deploy the 2nd Defense Fleet. 40,000 ships. They cannot defeat us if we overwhelm them with numbers. But Drax knew the truth. Numbers didn't matter when you were outmatched in every other way. The human fleet pressed deeper into Kreth space, conquering one star system after another. Each battle was more one-sided than the last. The Kreth fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against superior technology and tactics. In the city streets of the Kreth homeworld, civilians watched news broadcasts with growing fear. The invincible Kreth military was being destroyed. The humans were coming, and nothing could stop them. After 2 weeks, the human fleet arrived at Kreth Prime, the enemy homeworld. Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the planet that had ordered the death of New Eden. 60,000 Kreth warships defending their home, reported Colonel Harris. Every ship they have left. Blake nodded slowly. Open a channel to War Master Shakran. When the Kreth leader's reptilian face appeared on screen, Blake spoke without emotion. War Master Shakran, you are defeated. Your fleet is outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with mercy. Your leaders will face trial, but your civilians will be spared. Continue fighting, and we will be forced to destroy every ship you have. Shakran's face twisted with rage. The Kreth do not surrender to inferior species. We will fight until our last warrior falls. So be it, Blake replied, and closed the channel. He turned to his fleet commanders. All ships, engage the enemy. Disable when possible, destroy when necessary. Let's finish this. The Battle of Kreth Prime lasted 12 brutal hours. The Kreth fought with desperate courage, knowing they were defending their homeworld and families. But courage wasn't enough. Human ships moved like dancers, their coordinated attacks overwhelming the Kreth defenses. Advanced human AI systems predicted enemy movements and adjusted tactics in real time. Captain Thomas Reed watched from the Retribution as another Kreth battleship exploded under concentrated fire from his ships. He felt no joy in the destruction, only grim necessity. These were the people who had murdered 4 million innocents. Justice had to be served. Captain, called Lieutenant Jackson. The Kreth flagship is trying to ram us. Evasive maneuvers, Thomas ordered calmly. Target their engines only. I want that ship intact. The Retribution's guns spoke with perfect precision, destroying the enemy flagship's engines while leaving the crew compartments undamaged. The Kreth ship tumbled helplessly in space, unable to maneuver or fight. When the battle finally ended, the Kreth fleet was gone. 60,000 warships reduced to burning wreckage or disabled hulks drifting in orbit. The human fleet established a complete blockade around Kreth Prime, cutting off all supply lines and communication. Admiral Blake broadcast a message to the planet below. People of the Kreth Dominion, your military has been defeated. Your war leaders will be brought to justice for their crimes. Humanitarian supplies will be provided to your civilians. Any attempt to resume hostilities will result in immediate and overwhelming response. On the surface, War Master Shakran sat in his command bunker, surrounded by his few remaining officers. They had lost everything. The mighty Kreth Dominion, which had terrorized the sector for centuries, had been crushed in less than a month. How? Shakran whispered. How did we lose so completely? Fleet Commander Drax, wounded but alive, answered quietly. We forgot the most important rule of warfare, War Master. Never underestimate your enemy. The humans weren't merchants playing at war. They were warriors pretending to be merchants. In orbit, human ships began scanning the planet, searching for evidence. What they found in the Kreth military archives shocked even the hardened soldiers. Records of not 7, but 12 colony massacres over the past 50 years. Species that had been exterminated before they could even report the attacks to the Galactic Council. Captain Reed read the reports with growing anger. 12 colonies. Tens of millions of people. And the galaxy did nothing. Actually, sir, Commander Alice Bennett said quietly, the galaxy didn't know about most of them. The Kreth made sure there were no survivors to report the attacks. Thomas looked at the planet below, thinking about justice and vengeance and the thin line between them. Get me Admiral Blake. He needs to see this. Across the galaxy, species watched in stunned silence as the news spread. The Kreth Dominion, one of the most aggressive military powers in the sector, had been completely defeated in just 30 days. The human fleet had lost fewer than 3,000 ships out of 500,000. At the Galactic Council station, ambassadors scrambled to reassess their understanding of humanity. They were not the peaceful merchants they had pretended to be. They were something far more dangerous, a species with overwhelming military power and the discipline to use it only when necessary. Ambassador Richard Cooper received calls from dozens of species, some congratulating him, others expressing fear, many requesting formal alliances. He answered them all with the same message: humanity wants peace. But we will never again allow innocents to be slaughtered while bureaucrats debate. On Kreth Prime, human Marines landed at the government complex and arrested War Master Chakran and his entire command staff. They did not kill them. They did not torture them. They simply took them into custody, treating them according to human laws of war. Chakran, in chains for the first time in his life, looked at the human soldiers with confusion. "Why do you not execute us? We would have shown you no mercy." The Marine commander, Colonel Jack Morgan, looked at the former War Master with cold eyes. "Because we're not you. You'll face trial. You'll answer for every life you took. And the galaxy will see that humanity believes in justice, not just revenge." The Kreth's reckoning had come. And it had arrived with overwhelming force and terrifying precision. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kreth Prime. The planet below remained under human occupation, but life was slowly returning to normal for ordinary Kreth civilians. Human soldiers patrolled the streets, but they did not loot or terrorize. Instead, they distributed food, provided medical care, and maintained order. Admiral Henry Blake stood in the orbital command station, reviewing reports from the investigation teams. What they had discovered in the Kreth government archives was far worse than anyone had imagined. 12 colonies completely destroyed, reported Colonel Peter Harris, his voice heavy with disgust. Not 7 as we initially thought. 12 different species. Over 40 million people total. Men, women, children. All murdered because the Kreth considered them weak. Blake's jaw tightened. And the Galactic Council knew? Some council members suspected, but the Kreth had political influence. Species were afraid to accuse them without absolute proof. The few survivors who tried to report the attacks mysteriously disappeared before reaching council space. Blake slammed his fist on the table. 40 million people. And the galaxy looked the other way because it was convenient. On the planet below, Captain Thomas Reed walked through what had been the Kreth Military Intelligence Building. Human forensic teams were carefully documenting every piece of evidence. Each file they found revealed another horror. "Captain," called Lieutenant David Jackson, holding a data pad. "You need to see this. We found detailed planning documents for future attacks." The Kreth had identified 23 more colonies across the sector as acceptable targets, including 3 more human settlements. Thomas felt ice in his veins. If humanity hadn't responded to New Eden's destruction, dozens more colonies would have died. The Kreth had been planning a campaign of systematic genocide. "Make copies of everything," he ordered. "The galaxy needs to see this." Back on Earth, a heated debate raged in the Unified Government Assembly. Some delegates demanded total destruction of the Kreth homeworld. Others argued for occupation and forced cultural reformation. A few advocated for mercy and rebuilding. "They murdered 40 million innocent people," shouted Delegate Michael Ross. "They were planning to kill millions more. They deserve nothing but destruction." "And if we destroy them, what does that make us?" countered Delegate Susan Matthews. "We came here for justice, not genocide. If we slaughter an entire planet of civilians for the crimes of their leaders, we become exactly what we're fighting against." Secretary General William Harrison raised his hand for silence. "Admiral Blake has requested we hold a formal tribunal. He believes the Kreth leadership should face trial under galactic law, with representatives from all affected species serving as judges." "A trial?" Ross scoffed. "They don't deserve a trial. They certainly didn't give one to New Eden." "That's precisely the point," Harrison replied quietly. "We must be better than them. The galaxy is watching us. If we react with blind vengeance, we prove we're just another aggressive species with big guns. If we react with justice, we show that humanity believes in law and order, even for our enemies." The vote was close, but mercy won. The Kreth leadership would face trial, not execution without due process. 6 weeks later, the tribunal began. It was held aboard the massive human dreadnought Retribution, chosen for its symbolic value. The courtroom had been constructed in one of the ship's main hangar bays, large enough to accommodate representatives from 40 different species. War Master Chakran and his command staff sat in secure cells, watching as the evidence against them was presented. Holographic displays showed the burning colonies. Audio recordings played the screams of dying civilians. Survivors from 6 different species testified about the horrors they had witnessed. A young Rendari female named Keela stood before the tribunal, her blue skin pale with remembered trauma. I was 8 years old when the Kreth came to my world. I watched from a cave as they burned my entire village. My parents, my little brother, everyone I knew. Tears streamed down her face. The Kreth didn't just kill them quickly. They made it slow. They wanted us to suffer. Shakran listened to the testimony with his scaled face showing no emotion. But Fleet Commander Drax, sitting beside him, could not hide his shame. He had known what they were doing was wrong, but he had followed orders anyway. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Species after species presented evidence of Kreth atrocities. The judges, carefully selected from neutral council species, listened to every word. When it came time for Shakran to speak in his own defense, he stood proudly. We did what we did because we are strong and they were weak. That is the law of nature. The strong survive. The weak perish. Judge Arbitrator Thelman, an elderly Thaxarian who had served the council for 200 years, looked at Shakran with contempt. That is not the law of nature. That is the law of barbarians. True strength is not found in the ability to destroy the helpless. It is found in the wisdom to protect them. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Shakran and his senior commanders were sentenced to life imprisonment. The Kreth military would be disbanded completely, allowed to maintain only basic defensive forces. Massive reparations would be paid to all affected species over the next century. But the humans went further. Admiral Blake announced that humanity would establish peacekeeping forces throughout the sector. Species that couldn't defend themselves would receive human protection and military training. Never again, Blake declared. Never again will aggressive species massacre the innocent while the galaxy watches. Humanity will not allow it. On Kreth Prime, something unexpected began to happen. Younger Kreth, especially those who had seen the evidence presented at the trial, started questioning their culture's obsession with military strength. A movement emerged calling for reformation and peace. One young Kreth named Vexa approached a human marine outpost, asking to speak with the commander. Colonel Jack Morgan met him cautiously. I want to apologize, Vexa said quietly. Not just for my people, but personally. I believed the propaganda. I thought you humans were weak. I thought what we did was acceptable. His voice broke. I was wrong. And I want to help make things right. Jack studied the young Kreth carefully. How? Let me help rebuild, Vexa replied. Some of us want to change. We want to be better than what Shakran made us. Jack thought about it, then nodded slowly. All right. But understand this, we're watching. One wrong move, and you're done. I understand, Vexa said. And thank you. For not destroying us when you could have. Captain Thomas Reed stood on New Eden's surface, now a blackened wasteland. Human engineers were beginning the long process of rebuilding. Around him stood representatives from all 12 species that had lost colonies to the Kreth. This will be a memorial, Thomas announced. Not just for New Eden, but for all victims of the Kreth's atrocities. 40 million names will be inscribed here. And above them, a simple message, never forgotten. Never unavenged. Never repeated. A Rendari ambassador stepped forward. Why do you do this, Captain? Why spend so much effort remembering people who aren't even your own species? Thomas looked at the alien with steady eyes. Because that's what separates us from the Kreth. They saw other species as things to be destroyed. We see them as people to be protected. Every life matters. Every death deserves to be remembered. Back on Earth, Ambassador Richard Cooper addressed the Galactic Council one final time. Humanity has proven its strength. We have shown that we possess the largest military force in known space. But more importantly, we have shown restraint. We could have destroyed the Kreth completely. Instead, we chose justice. He looked around the chamber. We are now formally requesting a full seat on this council. Not as conquerors, but as protectors. We will use our strength to ensure that what happened to New Eden never happens again to any species. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was granted full council membership, along with 3 permanent seats on the Security Committee. The sleeping giant had awakened. But instead of destroying the galaxy, it had chosen to guard it. Justice had been served. And mercy had been shown. 1 year had passed since the war ended. The galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have imagined. Captain Thomas Reed stood at the memorial site on New Eden's surface. The construction was finally complete. 40 million names were inscribed on massive crystal walls that stretched for kilometers, representing every victim of the Kreth massacres across 12 different worlds. At the center stood a towering monument with the inscription carved in 70 languages, never forgotten. Never unavenged. Never repeated. Families from across the galaxy had come to pay their respects. A Rendari mother placed flowers beneath her daughter's name. An elderly Thaxarian touched the wall where his grandchildren's names were etched. A young human woman wept as she found her parents' names among the millions. "It's beautiful," said Commander Alice Bennett, standing beside Thomas. "Sad, but beautiful." "It had to be built," Thomas replied quietly. "The dead deserve to be remembered. And the living need to understand what we're preventing." Behind them, construction crews were beginning the real work of rebuilding New Eden. The first new settlement would be called Hope's Landing, and already 15,000 volunteers from 20 different species had signed up to help rebuild the colony. At the Galactic Council Station, the chamber had been reorganized. Humanity now occupied 3 prominent seats, and the entire structure of galactic government had been reformed. New laws protected developing colonies. Aggressive military expansion was now prohibited under severe penalties. And most importantly, a unified defense force had been established, trained and led by human military advisors. Ambassador Richard Cooper addressed the full council assembly. 1 year ago, this council failed to protect innocent people. 40 million died because aggressive species were allowed to operate without consequence. That ends today. He gestured to the holographic display showing the new peacekeeping fleet. The Unified Defense Force now includes ships and personnel from 18 different species, all trained to human standards. We have established rapid response teams in every sector. If any species attempts what the Kreth did, they will face immediate intervention. Ambassador Grax of the Vorten clans, once hostile to humanity, now spoke with respect. The Vorten clans acknowledge that humanity has changed the balance of power in the galaxy. But we also acknowledge that you have used this power wisely. For that, you have our support. Other ambassadors voiced similar sentiments. Even species that had initially feared humanity's military strength now recognized that the humans had brought stability to a galaxy that desperately needed it. On Earth, Admiral Henry Blake stood before a graduating class at the newly established Galactic Defense Academy. Young officers from 30 different species stood at attention, wearing the unified blue and silver uniforms that represented the new order. "You are the first generation of what I hope will be a lasting peace," Blake told them. "You come from different worlds, different cultures, different biologies. But you share one thing in common, the belief that the strong should protect the weak, not destroy them." He walked along the rows of cadets. "Some of you come from species that were victims of aggression. Others come from species that were aggressors. That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what you do from this day forward." Among the graduates was Vexa, the young Kreth who had asked to help rebuild. He had proven himself over the past year, working tirelessly to make amends for his people's crimes. Now he stood as proof that even former enemies could change. After the ceremony, Blake pulled Vexa aside. "I'm assigning you to the peacekeeping force in the Outer Rim. Your people's reputation precedes you, but your personal record speaks for itself. Use this opportunity to show the galaxy that the Kreth can be more than what Chakran made you." Vexa saluted crisply. "I won't let you down, Admiral. My people have been given a second chance. I intend to honor that gift." On the Kreth homeworld, reformation was progressing slowly but steadily. The older generation still clung to their warrior culture, but the young were embracing change. Schools now taught cooperation instead of conquest. Museums displayed the evidence of past atrocities, ensuring future generations would understand the cost of unchecked aggression. Former Fleet Commander Drax, serving his life sentence in a secure facility on Earth, spent his days writing a detailed account of the Kreth military's crimes. He had been given a choice: remain silent and face isolation, or cooperate fully and contribute to galactic education. He chose cooperation. "Perhaps my testimony can prevent another species from making the same mistakes we did," he told his human guards. "That would give my life some meaning beyond destruction." Captain Thomas Reed had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the peacekeeping fleet's first sector. His flagship was still the Retribution, but its weapons were now used primarily for deterrence rather than destruction. He stood on the bridge, reviewing reports from across his sector. A distress call had come from a small colony under pirate attack. Within hours, his fleet had arrived, destroyed the pirate vessels with minimal casualties, and ensured the colonists' safety. "Another successful operation, Admiral," reported Commander Bennett. "The colonists are requesting to thank you personally." Thomas smiled. "Tell them thanks aren't necessary. This is what we do now. This is what we've always been meant to do." On Earth, Secretary General William Harrison held a press conference to address humanity about the state of the galaxy. 1 year ago, we unleashed the largest military fleet in galactic history, he said. Many feared we would become conquerors. Instead, we became protectors. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we're reducing our active fleet from 500,000 ships to 300,000. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembled journalists. This reduction is possible because peace is working, Harrison continued. Aggressive species have stopped their expansion. Conflicts are being resolved through diplomacy. And when force is necessary, the Unified Defense Force can handle it with smaller numbers. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. But let me be absolutely clear, we are not disarming. We are not becoming naive. The remaining 300,000 ships will remain on active status, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Because we learned the hard way that peace requires strength. In a small apartment on Mars, Emily Clark watched the broadcast. She was one of the few survivors from New Eden's government, having been off-world during the attack. She had lost everyone she knew, colleagues, friends, and her husband Robert, the governor who had worried about the Kreth just hours before they struck. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find a young human woman and a Kreth male, both wearing Unified Defense Force uniforms. Ms. Clark, the woman said gently. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Miller, and this is Cadet Vexa. We wanted to meet you personally. Emily stiffened at seeing the Kreth, but forced herself to remain calm. Why? Because you represent what we're fighting to protect, Sarah explained. And Vexa wanted to apologize on behalf of his people. Vexa stepped forward, his scaled face showing genuine remorse. I cannot undo what my people did to yours. I cannot bring back your loved ones. But I can promise you that I will spend every day of my life ensuring it never happens again. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Anger, grief, and pain warred with the knowledge that this individual had not been responsible for the attack. Finally, she nodded slowly. See that you do, she said quietly. Make their deaths mean something. At the New Eden Memorial, the dedication ceremony concluded as the sun set. Admiral Blake stood at the podium, addressing the thousands gathered. 4,200,643 people died here, he said, his voice carrying across the memorial grounds. Each number represents a life. A story. A dream that will never be fulfilled. We cannot bring them back. But we can ensure their sacrifice was not in vain. He gestured to the crystal walls glowing in the fading light. This memorial stands as a promise. To the dead, we promise you are not forgotten. To the living, we promise you are protected. To future generations, we promise we will never allow this to happen again. The crowd stood in silence as the names on the walls began to illuminate, one by one, until all 40 million glowed like stars against the darkening sky. Thomas Reed stood among them, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From the horror of New Eden's destruction to the triumph of justice. From the unleashing of 500,000 warships to the establishment of lasting peace. The sleeping giant had awakened. It had shown its teeth. It had proven its strength. But more importantly, it had shown its wisdom. The galaxy would never forget the year humanity stopped pretending to be harmless. The year justice came with overwhelming force. The year the strong chose to protect the weak instead of destroying them. A new galactic order had begun. And humanity stood at its center, not as conquerors, but as guardians. The memorial lights continued to glow as darkness fell, a constellation of remembrance stretching across the rebuilt world. 40 million stars for 40 million souls. Never forgotten. Never unavenged. Never repeated.